So for our next talk, I'm going to be speaking with Jess T. Dugan. So Jess, if you'd like to join me. Welcome.
How's this working? Good? Great.
So we're going to be speaking about Jess's new book, Look at Me Like You Love Me, published by Mac. But I'm going to just briefly introduce you before we start to discuss this fascinating new project. Jess is born in Biloxi in the US and has completed a BFA at the Massachusetts College of Art and Design and a master's in museum studies at Harvard University and an MFA at Columbia College Chicago, and also was a recipient in 2015 of a Obama White House LGBT artist Champion of Change, and is also active as a teacher, I believe, in the field of photography. So to jump right into this new project, the Look at Me Like You Love Me is a work that I think as soon as you open it, you understand that you're exploring questions of identity. And it has a very specific feel to it. The book is made up of a combination of self-portraits and portraits, also still lives and text, so there's sort of many layers to the project. And could you tell us a little bit about how this sort of multi-layered approach came about for you in thinking about this book?
Sure, of course, and thank you for that introduction. It's lovely to be here with you, and I love that you mentioned my BFA because I think all of my faculty are here. So we have a very large Boston contingent over there. Anyway, so that's very sweet. But yes, to begin. So this book, Look at Me Like You Love Me, is a collection of new photographs from a long-term project of mine called Every Breath We Drew. And it really centers around the intersection of individual identity and then the need for connection that we have with others. Both, that's on a platonic level, a romantic level, a communal level, thinking about how our identities are validated through relationship with others. As you mentioned, the book is a combination of portraits, including self-portraits, and there are also still life images. And I very much think of the book as a visual poem. The images are sequenced based on color and light and gesture and mood, and there's a kind of emotional arc through the book. I very much conceptualized it as a kind of artist book rather than more of a catalog, which of course is something that Mac often does with their publications. And there are texts in the book. So this is the first time I've incorporated my own creative writing alongside my photographs. There are about 20 text pieces throughout the photographs, interwoven throughout the sequence as their own element. And the texts fall into three main categories. One is a story or a memory connected to a specific photograph. The second is pieces of writing that psychoanalyze my own need to make photographs and what that does for me, what that relationship does for me. And then the third category really centers directly around a kind of desire. And the texts were often written in response to particular images, but when we put the book together, we separated the texts from their source to intentionally leave a lot of ambiguity. And intentionally leave a lot of entrance points for a viewer to bring their own experience to the work and to have their own emotional engagement with it. And interestingly, I really had to have Mac do that separation because I'm so close to the texts and the photographs that I tried so hard to separate them, and I delivered a draft where they were all connected. So Mac kept my sequence of photographs, but they completely reworked the sequence of texts.
Yeah, I think there's certain things that it's almost impossible for an artist to do in detaching yourself from work that you made. But I mean, you talked about how close you were to these texts. in terms of the people that you photographed, this another question I had is, I mean, the project does have a, you know, a real sense of connection to each subject. And I was curious to know whether these were all people that you had strong relationships with, if there are people that you, maybe that strangers or people that you didn't know as well, or how you kind of constructed this group of people that feature in the book.
Sure. So the subjects really range. They are all people who I meet and feel some kind of energetic connection with, some kind of attraction to, something about them I want to know, something about them I want to spend time with. Some of them are very close friends and family members. Some are people who I've known for many years and photographed repeatedly over a long period of time. And others are people I meet in passing and just feel interested in. And photographing is a way for me to spend time with someone I'm interested in and get to know them. You know, similar to the pictures we were just looking at, I use a medium format camera. I'm often working on a tripod, almost always. I use natural light. I use slow exposure. So my process is very collaborative, and I spend a lot of time. And also, the photographs I make are so tied to my own life. These in particular come from a really personal place, and so I can't really separate my act of photographing from my relationships, people that I want to know or know very well.
Right. I mean, there's another word that I think comes to mind very quickly when looking at this project, and that is intimacy. You know, both in terms of that impression that you create very quickly in the book, an intimate relationship to these people that we're looking at, intimacy that we see in some of the pictures, particularly with the couples that feature. I'm wondering if you could say something about what that idea means to you in the context of this book.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of my work centers around ideas of intimacy and a depth around relationship. In this book in particular, there are also a lot of images of two people together, or intimate exchanges in personal spaces, bedrooms. That's really a core theme of my work. You know, and another thing that is in this book, which I don't always lead with, but it's a heavy part, is, of course, representation of queerness and queer couples, queer individuals, non-binary folks, trans folks. So my work has always existed within queer communities, in part because of how I identify, and that's always been my lived experience. But in this work, I'm looking at a kind of intimacy around relationship and around personhood, really, what it means to be a person, what it means to be living now. A lot of this work was made during the pandemic, which certainly took a particular tone. But within that, there's of course an undercurrent of queerness and making work from my own lived experience.
And I also wanted to ask you about the title of the book, which I think is really interesting because when I first read it, I kind of read it as an instruction. So as if I was being told that this is what I had to do when looking at this book. I think it maybe could be interpreted in other ways. But I'm curious to know just a bit about how you chose that title, which then really influences, I think, the way that you look at the images.
Sure, I'm glad you asked about it. Yeah, it took me a while to find the title. And I remember I was so nervous when it finally came into my mind. I was so nervous to share it with Mac. And I emailed Michael, and he wrote me back like 10 minutes later and said, "Brilliant." And I was like, yes, we got a title. It came from one of the texts. And the text was written about something I would say to my partner when I would photograph her, as an instruction to get a certain kind of expression. But what I love about it, pulling it into the title, is that I feel like it can go in every direction, like you mentioned. Like, it could be interpreted that I say that to the people I'm photographing. It could be interpreted that I'm asking that of you for myself. It could be interpreted that I want the subjects to look at me that way. So it really centers around this idea of wanting to be seen and wanting to be accepted for who you are, for your authentic self, which is a really core theme throughout all of my work. And you also mentioned self-portraits. The book begins and ends with a self-portrait. This book is very much about me and my own subjectivities and my own desires, and I really wanted to lead with that in the book as well as in the photographs.
Terrific. Again, 15 minutes have slipped away from us far too quickly. But do we have some questions from the audience? We do.
Thank you. Your work focuses very beautifully on older adults. There's a lot of talk in the media today about younger adults struggling with questions of identity, perhaps more acutely than before. Do you see yourself focusing in future work perhaps on younger adults in the community that you describe?
Sure, that's a great question. Yeah, I have another project that focused specifically on transgender older adults that I made prior to this one. You know, I think at this moment I'm most interested in making work close to home. So I'm continuing work from this project, which really has a pretty significant age range, although it's maybe not always so evident in each individual image. And then I'm also working on a body of work about my family. So thinking about queer families, queer parenting, 3 generations of my particular family. So that's really where my focus is right now, but maybe down the road.
Do we have another question?
Just if you would mention why you brought in your still lifes.
Oh, sure, yeah. So throughout the book, there are several still life images, and I've actually always made some still life images, and they're often pairs of objects or things that come into contact with the human body. And my still life images were always a way for me to reference this need we have for relationship without depicting a specific couple, because that conceptually goes down a different path. I wanted to speak about it more broadly. And in this book and body of work, a lot of the still life images are flowers as well. That's something I photographed a lot during the pandemic. And I think for me, it was my way of processing these large existential questions about what it means to be alive, what it means to be in relationship, the immense joy and immense terror of loving, you know, another being, thinking about what happens when all of our relationships are severed and what that does to the self. So I wasn't thinking of that, and rationally, but that's really what I was working through with those images. And they also bring in an element of temporality, which is really important. A lot of the images are also made really early in the morning or really late in the day in this very quickly moving light. And for me, those references to time are important to ideas of life and death, but also fluidity ties into gender and sexuality in the way that it moves throughout this book. And it ties into another theme, which is the duality of beauty and loss, and thinking about how there's often loss or risk of loss, but the flip side of that is this urgency to live really authentically and to really take in beauty, and that's the line I'm trying to straddle in these photographs and in this book.
Terrific. Jess, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
And you can see